Good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's live stream. I'm very excited about this topic, and I'm really pleased that you could get along and join us here for our Myrtle Rust conversation, where I have some fantastic guests who are going to speak to us about Myrtle Rust. For those of you that may know a little bit about it, prepare yourself, because you're going to come away from tonight knowing a lot more and understanding how you can do something about it, most of all. Now, I have just got back here to Sydney, where I returned from Melbourne, and given that I was flying into a Tay humanity front, the consequence of that was that the airport was somewhat chaotic. The bags came out like a sushi train at about 11 p.m. There was just one or two empty things on it revolving around, and it took about 45 to 50 minutes, which cost me the chance to get home. That's why I'm in this very random location. You're going to get different sounds. You're going to get people walking into a hotel. The barista's going to be bashing on the thing, because I just had to get to the car park and find a quiet location with some reception so that we could get on with this. So I acknowledge that I'm back in Sydney on the Gadigal land of the Eora, and I also acknowledge that this broadcast today has real significance when it comes to caring for country, because looking forward, coming up with solutions to the challenge of Myrtle Rust is a very, very big challenge for land managers. And our speakers today will bring us up to date with what's going on and give us the chance, through Erin and all of the team at Australian Citizen Science Association, the opportunity to get involved and be part of the solution. So on that topic, let us know where you're joining us from. For those of you who have jumped on, let us know what country you're joining us from. Like I said, I'm here in Sydney. Maybe you're in Naarm, where I just came from, in Melbourne. Maybe you're over in Adelaide. But anyway, let us know in the comments. And I think it's time to get into it and share with you our wonderful special guests. So I'd like to start with Erin Roger, and Erin is over here. Erin, good evening. How are you?
Good evening. Doing well, thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Look, we got people. We've got Evie from Perth. We've got RB from Canberra. There's Leonie all the way from Albany. What a Warren country. Steve, lovely to see you, Steve. I was in your hood, but didn't quite get to see you. Biripi country, good organic gardening magazine. Thanks for joining us. Mike Robinson from the Otways, Berry in New South Wales. Wow, it's fantastic. There's people from all Bundaberg in Queensland. We've got Doris, Leonie Badley. Thanks, everyone. It's lovely to see you all here. Now, Erin, I know we're going to bring our guests on, and you're going to give us a little bit of a background as we go into this conversation about the citizen science aspects. But just tell us a little bit about yourself so people know where you're coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. So as you know, Costa, really passionate about citizen science. And so part of my role at the Atlas of Living Australia is to help manage the citizen science program. And the Atlas of Living Australia, we are Australia's largest biodiversity data aggregator. So that means that we pull in data from lots of different sources, and that includes citizen science. And so tonight we're talking about Myrtle Rust, and we're talking about how people can participate and provide their data, which goes into the Atlas. And then anyone can access the Atlas data. It's open source, and then it can be used by researchers in government and communities to better understand the disease.
And I mean, Erin, and for everyone listening, this is the bit that I am most excited about, and why I was so keen to to bring Erin and everyone that Erin's put together for us to meet tonight, because they need us. They need every citizen to be on the lookout for this. And when we aggregate, as Erin said, this data, we can start to very basically but very quickly map how many sightings and how many spottings there are to see where this front, this aggressive front of Myrtle Rust is shifting around the country. And when there's little pop-ups in areas, it means that action can be taken. So I thought maybe we'll bring Rebecca on first up. Now, Rebecca Paxton. Rebecca, welcome. And just very quickly, Rebecca's an intern, a postgraduate intern working on the Myrtle Rust campaign. Rebecca, great to have you here. Tell us a little bit about your science and what you're up to and how you've worked into the Myrtle Rust frame.
Well, hi, Costa, and hi, everyone. Thanks for having me here. I'm on Ngunnawal country, Ngunnawal Ngambri country in Canberra. And I am, as Costa said, I'm a postgraduate intern from the University of Adelaide. I'm a social scientist in training, and I'm really interested in how people get involved in managing invasive species. And so it was really a great opportunity to be able to join the Atlas of Living Australia's engagement team. And when I heard about this Myrtle Rust project, I knew that this was going to be so I whole time and started reaching out to all of these experts who were working on Myrtle Rust and trying to control the spread, or at least limit the spread of this disease, or trying to find a treatment for it, or some kind of prevention. And I was so impressed and moved by the small but really dedicated team of forest pathologists, researchers, land managers who are really in this fight and having this fight for a long time. So it was arrived in Australia in 2010, and since then it's all the way up. So right on the east coast into northern New South Wales, and moved all the way up to Queensland, into the Northern Territory. It's moved down the coast, all through, or almost all the way through New South Wales into Victoria, and there's also been sightings in Tasmania and in the northern part of Western Australia. So it's spreading really very quickly. It spreads really easily, and I think one of our other guests, Alyssa, is going to talk a little bit more about that later on. But basically, when I started reaching out to these scientists, they were telling me how there really wasn't an awful lot of data, not enough to really know which plants were being impacted, where it had already spread to, how different plants were being impacted differently. And so we really knew that a citizen science campaign would be the best way to get this kind of information, because it's like having millions and millions of little monitoring stations all across the country that can feed into these what these researchers are doing. So it's a pretty amazing opportunity.
Well, thanks, Alyssa. I'm sorry, Rebecca. I know just at the beginning there you were breaking up, and I could see Erin frantically texting you or sending messages. So hopefully we'll be able to run over some of those messages again, just to be sure that everyone heard it. So we'll now go in. I'll leave you up there, Rebecca. It's sort of, yeah, you're kind of doing the kind of shuffle, unfortunately. But stay with us, because hopefully it'll lighten up. Alyssa Martino is a PhD candidate at the University of Sydney and a Myrtle Rust specialist. Alyssa, welcome to the conversation. Lovely to have you here. How are you? That's great. Wonderful to continue the conversation. Can you, much like Rebecca, can you tell us a little bit about your background, how you got into Myrtle Rust and what you're up to in that space?
Yeah, of course. Would love to. So I'm based at the University of Sydney, and I guess my research has a little bit of a different focus to the citizen science aspect, but I've really been working to find plants that are resistant or they can tolerate any exposure to myrtle rust. And by identifying these trees, what we're trying to do is identify which ones we might be able to use for breeding efforts, as an example, or what might be more suitable for your gardens, just to reduce the amount of the pathogen that's spreading around in the environment. I guess where the citizen science aspect comes in for me, last year I was really fortunate to receive funding from Eucalypt Australia under the Dale Fellowship to establish the Gumtree Guardians project on iNaturalist. And that was really with a focus on drawing attention to myrtle rust in Australia to the general public, and really raising awareness of the impact that it can have on a lot of our native species and what people can be doing for it as well. So it's been I guess, a very rounded out sort of experience, and I'll probably talk a little bit later about how the data that's being collected is beneficial to us as scientists and how we can be using that. But it's probably a conversation for a little bit later in the broadcast.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you, Alyssa. And we'll continue on moving on through so that we can get our 4 guests on stage and then just have our banter and appreciate that 4 of these specialists are going to produce a lot more than the sum of the parts, I like to believe. So our next guest is Thomas Massaglio, and he's an iNaturalist expert, and I've had the pleasure of being out in the field with Thomas. And when it comes to a passion meter, there is no red line space, because he pushes straight through that red line and just absolutely loves being out in the bush and learning, looking, observing, but most of all sharing. Thomas, welcome to the yarn. Tell everyone a little bit about yourself and why you are such an iNaturalist advocate.
Yeah, thanks, Costa. It's fantastic to see you again, and really great to be here with everyone. Yeah, so I'm also doing my PhD at the moment at the University of New South Wales, though, and not on myrtle rust specifically, but on Australian plants in general. And yes, I am a bit of an iNaturalist nut. Some might call me a fanatic. So for anyone that doesn't know about iNaturalist, it's one of the world's, not just Australia, but one of the world's biggest citizen science platforms. It is this fantastic opportunity where amateur naturalists and citizen scientists from around the globe, including Australia, can jump on and share their photographs of organisms they've encountered, whether they be myrtle rust or plants or bugs or fungi, you name it. And then the really fantastic part is that they get to interact with all these amazing experts from around the globe that can let them know exactly what they've been observing. And then perhaps best of all, their data can be used in real life research and conservation as well. So it's this just fantastic opportunity for not only the citizen scientists to have this amazing learning experience, but also for photographs that you take to become used as really meaningful data in research and conservation. So I find it to be a very gratifying platform to use, and also one where it doesn't matter who you are or how much experience you have, there's always something to learn.
So how did you engage with iNaturalist? What was it that took you down that rabbit hole?
Yeah, so it was a while back now. Back in 2018, I was actually doing an internship at the Australian Museum in the insect department. And I pretty much took the opportunity to spend all my free time during lunch hours going around and harassing the other curators, showing them photos of all kinds of weird things, mostly dead things I'd found washed up on the beach, which is a bit of a hobby of mine. And I got to the fish department And there's a fantastic researcher, Mark McGrauther, who used to be the curator of fishes at the Australian Museum. And he said, did you know that there's this platform called iNaturalist? And if you upload your photographs of your fishes and other interesting creatures you find washed up on the beach, other experts are able to identify them for you. And I never looked back. I was very, very quickly hooked. And certainly I've become very involved with the platform since.
Yeah, fantastic. It's great to hear and see, and it's wonderful to sort of have you in front of an audience that, you know, doesn't necessarily know too much about it and can engage with this project in a way that they can start to know iNaturalist and really help support the Myrtle Rust project at the same time. So using that as our next thread, Erin, and everyone, we're all on now, so feel free to consider this a free for all, and just chitter chatter alongside and over the top and all around each other. But Erin, give us a little more nitty gritty detail about what the plan is for the month of March and what it means for people listening and watching this broadcast, even as replay viewers. Hello to the replay viewers. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, sure, Costa. So it all kicks off on March the 1st, and we have about a month-long campaign. From March the 1st, we'll be sharing resources to help people identify Myrtle Rust, which is critical. And this all came about because generally alien species or invasive species are really underreported. And so we all love to record when we see a native species because it's exciting and it's beautiful and it's amazing. But we wanted to also get the message out that alien species are just as important to record because it's so important for providing that information and data for our researchers, scientists, and industry. So mark your calendars. It's only this Friday, and we want everyone to head out with their smartphone. They can use iNaturalist or another Australian app called NatureMapper if there's some NatureMapper users out there, and just get out there. And it's, as Rebecca was saying, there's Myrtle Rust popping up in most states and territories in Australia this season, which is quite a concern.
Now, just tell us a little bit about, just briefly, what will people do once they go on the app? The idea is that if they see something that looks like it, and we're going to get some presentations shortly so people can see. And if you have a look at the photos that Erin passed on through the team here in the actual post, they're an example of Myrtle Rust. But what is it that people will actually do on the app for those of them that don't know what iNaturalist and NatureMapper mean?
You want me to jump in, Erin?
Yeah, so you're the expert.
So for both of them, so iNaturalist is available, and I'll delve into this a little bit later, but iNaturalist is available as both a phone app, and you can also use it on the desktop, and same for NatureMapper. So basically you would sign up to an account to one of these platforms, and you'd go out and you're in the field. You've taken some photos of what you think might be Myrtle Rust. You're not totally sure, but that's okay, because if it's not Myrtle Rust, it might be a valuable record of a different fungus. It's all excellent data. So if you think it might be Myrtle Rust, you've taken some photos, you hop onto the app or the desktop, and you just upload your photographs and type in Myrtle Rust as what you think the identification is, because that way we have set up the project, the Gumtree Guardians project, in a way that as long as your record is identified as Myrtle Rust, it'll automatically go into the project for Alyssa and for all the experts to see. And so that is the best way to go about things. Even if you're not totally sure, call it Myrtle Rust. It'll be in front of our eyes much quicker and much easier to find. And then if it's something else, we can correct it, but otherwise we can confirm it for you.
And just to add a little bit onto the end of that, we will be releasing a Myrtle Rust identification and reporting guide. That'll also be out on March 1st. And that'll give you a bit of an idea of what to look for, what are the sort of signs and symptoms of Myrtle Rust, and also how to provide the best possible quality data that is the most useful for the experts who are working on this topic.
Alyssa, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, just I guess reiterating what Thomas has said, that as long as we can get eyes on it, we just want these observations filtering through to us in some way. So Myrtle Rust is very cryptic, so the guide that will be released will be incredibly helpful, just when it comes to identifying and trying to understand what some of the other symptoms are that aren't so typical of Myrtle Rust as well, but really just trying to filter everything through to a point that, you know, some experts in the field can get some eyes on it to be able to confirm, or at least get to a point that we can say whether it is or not.
Who would like to talk about the real ramifications, just to give people a picture of what it's doing and what those consequences are if we don't have people like yourselves, A, working on the citizen science side, B, working on the science detective side and the solution side? What impact has Myrtle Rust had around the country so far?
I'm happy to speak to that if anyone else wants to jump in. What we've seen so far, so it's only been present in Australia since 2010. And in that time, there are some species of Myrtaceae that are really susceptible to the pathogen. So in some key areas around Australia and in forests especially, we've seen localised extinction of some plant species already. So I saw someone in the chat earlier talk about the Rhodamnia and the Rhodomertis as well. So they're really good examples of some species that have just been really decimated by the pathogen. So there are some species that we do see some resilience there as well, and they're able to respond to the pathogen. But really it's this whole sort of flow-on effect of ecosystem change that we can see. So if there is extinction of certain species within particular areas, we're going to see flow-on effects. You know, it's changes to other flora in the area, it's changes to the animals as well, all of the fauna. So it can really have some flow-on effects, and I think we're still so early on in our time of seeing Myrtle Rust in Australia that we probably haven't seen the full impact that it could have. So getting this data now and really understanding where it's spreading within Australia and the different species that it might be impacting gives us as scientists a chance to try and intervene and rehabilitate some of those areas that might be impacted more than others.
It's interesting. I was speaking with Dr. Brett Summerall from the Royal Botanic Gardens in Sydney, and he was talking about how the impact of Myrtle Rust is actually being felt in the sense where they're calling some areas that have been impacted actually silent forests, because they're wiping out the tree canopy, and as a consequence of that, it's opening up the ground to heavier rainfall, more erosion, more light, which is damaging understory species, removing insect life, so then the bird life is gone. Like, there's this knock-on effect, and it, as I was typing, the title for this, I was thinking, Myrtle Rust. It's such an easy thing for people to go, oh yeah, it's just this thing, but being able to explain, as you said, Alyssa, the consequences, the knock-on, the ecological consequences that that it has, this is where, you know, I feel like that science communication from all of you in your particular facets of this is so important.
Yeah, it's a really holistic approach we need to take. And I would say something that's been fantastic about working in Myrtle Rust is that it is such a cohesive community, and we've had so many wonderful scientists come together from so many different disciplines to work on this problem. So if we can get the public on board as well, it's really powerful approach, and I think there's great things and wonderful impacts we can have in managing it.
I was just looking at this
following along a little bit on the...
Yeah, carry on.
And it's just following on a little bit about the impact as well. Talking to some of these experts in the broader research community about what they've seen, and like you say, seeing the parts of the forest just completely change, like these ecosystems where the Myrtaceae species, which is the sort of family of plants that is affected by Myrtle Rust, and that's a very dominant family in Australian plants and trees, and when an ecosystem becomes affected by Myrtle Rust, it's not just one tree species or one tree that disappears. It's potentially all of the different types of vegetation that's in there. And so the ecosystem itself changes incredibly dramatically and in a way that can't actually regenerate potentially. And if you think about places like the Daintree, for example, or the UNESCO World Heritage Gondwana rainforests, those are all sort of very dominated by Myrtaceae species and could change dramatically if this is allowed to continue to destroy the vegetation.
I just put that comment up there from Dave Saul. Dave Saul. I was working in bush regen in Sydney when Myrtle Rust arrived, freaked us out completely. And Patrick Brabant, has Myrtle Rust been introduced to any other countries at this stage? Anyone got an answer on that one? Is it being seen elsewhere? Someone else asked, you know, that there's eucalypts growing in many other countries. Are they being affected?
Yeah, so I can probably jump in again. But so essentially what happened, I guess a bit of a quick history of it, was that it originated in South America. So there are Myrtaceae species in South America naturally, and there's eucalyptus plantations there. So the threat of the impact of Myrtle Rust in Australia was really highlighted when Myrtle Rust started to impact eucalyptus plantations in Brazil. It has been identified in Australia in 2010, but it's spread to New Zealand as well, and they have a fantastic citizen science approach there, and they have thousands of observations of Myrtle Rust in the country. Hawaii, I think somebody from Cape Town logged on earlier as well, so it's also been identified there. And also our close neighbours, so Indonesia as an example as well.
Do you think is the phenomena of Myrtle Rust something that came out of plantations?
So essentially, when I hope I don't get too sciencey here for everyone, call me out if it's too heavy. But when we think about a pathogen like Myrtle Rust emerging in its natural ecosystem in South America, I guess it's sort of living in this balance with the hosts that are already there. So you have the hosts that have developed an immune system to be able to deal with this fungus that we have. But when a species is introduced, it hasn't evolved. It hasn't been in that same ecosystem with it. So it doesn't have that same immune response that trees that have naturalized with the pathogen would have. And so it's definitely highlighted when we have plantations, and especially when there's not very much genetic diversity. And so all of these trees are trying to respond in the same way to the pathogen, but they don't know how to. And so we get these big outbreaks like what we saw in Brazil as an example.
And I think Rebecca might have been cut off, but and I know Alyssa and I live in the inner west in Sydney, and there's lots of records from Sydney Park. And so we might think that it's just in bushland, but actually it's in urban environments as well. And actually in Victoria this year, it seems like it's in a lot of people's gardens. And so we want to know it all. We want to know whether it's in bushland, whether it's in our urban parks or in people's backyards. It's all really important and really valuable information.
Yeah, it is. And in places like Victoria, Tasmania, South Australia, Western Australia, where you don't see it in the wild very much, there's still a good chance that it has already spread to some of these places. It has spread to the northern part of Western Australia, but it hasn't made it, as far as we know, it hasn't made it down to the southern part yet, which would be a really terrifying prospect, because there are so many endemic Myrtaceae species there that don't exist anywhere else in the country, basically. But even though it hasn't been found outside of cultivated areas yet, doesn't mean that you shouldn't be on the lookout for it in bushland and in wilderness areas, because there's a good chance that it's actually there, but we just haven't seen it yet.
And just to jump in, I think this is one of the really powerful aspects of citizen science, that you have this Myrtle Rust that is already known from a lot of places and is potentially in a lot more places that we haven't yet detected it. And to correspond with that, we have this amazing network of citizen scientists across the whole country. So obviously, one of the limitations of professional researchers is that you can't be everywhere at the same time. Often you have limitations on funding and resources. And so detecting things like Myrtle Rust that are spreading across the country and across vast areas, both private property as well as bushland, it becomes a really, really difficult prospect. But when you have this incredible team of citizen scientists where you can basically have anyone from anywhere at any time around the country able to monitor and observe Myrtle Rust, it just becomes a really powerful tool to making sure we have as good an understanding of the distribution of Myrtle Rust as we possibly can.
Did you want to share any information with us that we were discussing earlier, Thomas?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can share my screen for a second and just give a very brief introduction. I won't go into one of my usual 2-hour workshops, but we'll keep things very quick. We'll keep things very quick and so able to see my screen?
There we go.
Superb. So this is what your typical iNaturalist home screen will look like. And of course, it will look a little bit different on the phone if you're using the app. And of course, we can go for NatureMapper as well. So NatureMapper tends to be a lot more popular in the ACT and in Canberra, whereas iNaturalist tends to be a lot more of a popular choice in the other states. So whichever one is your preference, they've both got a great phone app and both have a desktop version. So basically, you've gone out, you've taken your photos, you think you've seen some Myrtle Rust, and so you want to share them. What you would do on the desktop is you would just click the nice big green upload button. Very similar thing on the phone app as well. You would click choose files. You'd have your photos, and I'm just going to upload some plant ones here in this case, because this is a really important thing we wanted to mention, is that we not only want photographs of the Myrtle Rust, of course, but it's also really, really valuable to get photographs of not only the plants themselves that are affected by the Myrtle Rust, but also plants that might be affected by Myrtle Rust, but are looking healthy at the moment. So that's a really valuable thing. So For example, we know that the genus Rhodamnia, particularly species like Rhodamnia rubescens, so the common name for that one being scrub turpentine, I believe. So that's one of the ones that's really heavily impacted and is really greatly threatened by myrtle rust. So if you do see one of these trees, whether or not you can spot myrtle rust on it, it's a really good idea to take photographs of it and upload those to iNaturalist, because it all becomes really valuable data. So if you are taking photos of myrtle rust, of course, you'd be looking mostly at the leaves for the yellow fungus. And usually, 1 or 2 decent photographs of the fungus is good enough in most cases to identify it. So you don't need to go to a huge amount of effort. But in the case of taking photos of the plants, it's always a good idea to try and get as many photos as you can, because, of course, plant identification can often be tricky, and just taking 1 or 2 close-up shots might not allow us to figure out what plant that the myrtle rust is actually on. So as a kind of general safe set of guidelines, if you encounter a plant which you think might be affected by myrtle rust, or which you can definitely see in front of you is affected by myrtle rust, as a nice kind of basic set of images to take, it's good to take one of the whole plant. So it can kind of tell you, well, is it a shrub? Is it a tree? Roughly how big it is. Gives you nice environmental context. So here you can see this Rhodamnia rubescens that I've photographed in the forest. So these are some photos I took up in Kendall State Forest on the mid-north New South Wales coast. I've got another photo with one of my good mates, Pete from Victoria, for a nice sense of scale next to the trees. I've got some photos of the bark. I've got a kind of zoomed out shot of some branchlets showing the top side of the leaves. If you look really closely where my mouse is, you can just see some yellow spots. So these were a fairly healthy patch of Rhodamnia with a little bit of myrtle rust on them. But I've got underside of the leaves, and I am holding the plant here, but I should note that you should generally avoid handling plants where you do see myrtle rust on them, because that is one potential way that you can spread the spores, is by touching the leaves, getting the spores, and then tracking them elsewhere. So generally a good idea to avoid touching the plants where you can. But getting some photographs of the underside of the leaves is often important. I've got a close-up shot here showing all the detailed hairs on the leaves and the veins underneath. And so when we've got all of these, I should say, and here's my ultra close-up of the hairs. So putting all of these photos together, it just allows all of the experts to more easily identify these plants for you. And the way it works on iNaturalist in particular is that I've got multiple photographs of the same plant here. And what I want to do is combine them all into the same record, so that they're all in one nice tidy place where the experts can find them. So in the case of iNaturalist, I can easily just pick up an individual photo and then drag it onto another one, and you'll see they start to combine. Or I can just click this select all button here and then click combine. Nice and simple. My 8 photographs have all combined into one observation. Now, if you're taking photos with your smartphone or your camera, you'll notice that the date and the time should automatically be filled out, and so you don't have to do that. The location may or may not be filled out. So if you are using your smartphone to take photos and you've got location services turned on, then generally the photos will be automatically tagged with the location for you. But if the location is missing because your phone or your camera doesn't have geotagging turned on, you can easily click in the location bar and you can zoom around the map and figure out exactly where you saw that record and then put a pin down on the map. So nice and simple there. And then the final important thing to do, again, whether you're on iNaturalist or whether you're on NatureMapper, is to enter your identification. Because as I mentioned earlier, this helps the experts find your records a lot quicker than if you leave it blank. So in the case of myrtle rust, so if this was a photo of myrtle rust, I would just simply type in Myrtle Rust, and you'll see I get a little drop down, and I'll click that option, and away I go. Whereas if I'm taking a photo of the plant, if I know what it is, again, I can type in the exact name, and I can enter that, and it's nice and simple. But if I have no idea what the plant is, it's still very much advised to put in even a basic identification. So if even the only thing you know is that it's a plant, that is perfectly okay. We can type in plants, we can select that top option, And that will allow any of the experts who are specifically searching for plants to find your observation a lot faster. And so once you've entered those 3 key pieces of information, you've got your identification, you've got your date, you've got your location, you've got your photos. You just click the big green submit observation button, or there'll be a similar button on the phone app, and those records will be submitted to iNaturalist. As simple as that. There's an extra project you can join as well, but I'll let Alyssa talk about that in a second. But basically the way it works, especially if you've uploaded an observation of Myrtle Rust, as long as you've identified it as Myrtle Rust, it will automatically go into the project that we've set up. No further action needed from you. It's all completely automated. If it is Myrtle Rust, we'll confirm it for you, and that's fantastic. It's a really valuable data point. If it's not Myrtle Rust, one of the experts will correct it for you, and in all likelihood, it'll still be valuable, just for a different kind of project. So relatively straightforward process. I should add as well that if anyone ever is having troubles and they can't quite figure out how to upload their observations, or they're having trouble downloading the app, or just generally figuring out how to use iNaturalist, very welcome to contact me at any time. I'm more than happy to answer questions. If you search for my name online, you'll find my contact details and email very easily. And I'm always very, very happy to answer people's questions.
Now, I think I have you here, the beachcomber.
Yes, absolutely.
That's Thomas's address on iNaturalist. So you'll be able to follow what he does and have a look at the amazing work that he does on there. Now, did you say, Thomas, Alyssa was going to add to a little bit of the conversation here?
Yeah, I think what I can do is just at least show the landing page for the Gumtree Guardian site, because it gives some really good examples for just some really good examples of what Myrtle Rust looks like and what we're looking for as well. So I'm hoping you can see my screen at the moment.
Yep, I've got it here. Here we go.
Wonderful. Okay, so I'm hoping if I start scrolling, it will work. But what we have here is just a project on iNaturalist. So like Thomas was showing before, that if you tag something as Myrtle Rust, it will go into the iNaturalist database. But what we've actually set up is an individual project that we can capture all of that data within. And we will be regularly uploading like the guides to identifying Myrtle Rust and talking just a little bit about the science behind Myrtle Rust as well, if you're interested in diving into some of that. So when we look at all of the observations that we have so far, we have this, I guess, this really telltale symptom of Myrtle Rust, which are these yellow spores that you can see here. So if I just go into this observation as an example, we can start to see that these yellow spores have started to infect the fruits and the flowers of the plant. So what we want to be looking for when we look for Myrtle Rust is these bright yellow spores that are usually going to be presenting on the young soft tissues of the plant. So anything from the new leaves, as an example, like we can see here, or for example here, like the fruits as well. There are some more cryptic symptoms, but it's a lot harder to try and identify that. So for example, when the fungus has been on the plants for quite some time, you can just start to see almost like this flecking that's presenting on the leaves, and it can be really challenging to identify that as Myrtle Rust or not. We will still encourage you to upload observations like this. Greg has been a fantastic contribution to our project. He has uploaded many Myrtle Rust observations, and he's got a really keen eye for it. So there are some symptoms that might be a little bit harder to identify. But again, that's what we're there for, to be able to identify Myrtle Rust. The other thing I'll say as well is that it's really helpful if people start to, with your observations, just upload the name of the species that you think it's infecting as well. If you don't know, that's completely fine. And that is, I guess, what Thomas was saying before. If we can have lots of images of the actual tree that it's infecting, there are experts on iNaturalist who will be able to identify that as well. So I think there's probably not too much to show on here, but more just to say that we really need to be, we really just need to be getting as many observations on there as possible, and we can start to filter those down ourselves as well. But like Rebecca said earlier, there will be a reporting guide that is going to be released as well. So any extra details that you need, I'm quite active on Instagram as well. So I'll be sharing a lot of information on Instagram throughout the campaign. So you can find me as Myrtle Rust Martino on Instagram and Twitter if you use that, or X. And we will share a lot more details there as well about how to identify Myrtle Rust and what's going on.
I had a question here from Giovanni, and it was a good one in terms of just that sheer practicality. Does Myrtle Rust die in a hot compost? If not, we don't want to be spreading it in green waste recycling.
Yeah, so I would presume that in the reporting guide, Rebecca, jump in here if this isn't right, that there might be some links to management as well if you find it in your garden. Is that correct?
We don't have those in the guide, but we can put it up on the Gumtree Guardian. Unfortunately, there's different states have different requirements and prefer you to do different things. So it's always a good idea just to just Google Myrtle Rust and maybe biosecurity and the state that you're in, and you'll get some information about what the preferred action you take is. So for example, in Tasmania, there's a phone number that you can call to let them know that you've got Myrtle Rust in your garden, for example, and they will let you know how to dispose of it. I think in no cases should you be putting it in the green waste, because that is just spreading it. But yeah, we'll definitely have some
information. So yeah, there's a few steps that need to be taken before disposing of it, but exactly to Rebecca's point, each state will have different guidelines around that as well.
So whereabouts will that be, Rebecca? Just to reconfirm that, where will people find that information, like the hotline and those action tips? Because Fiona here said great tools to capture its spread. Do we do anything when we see it, or just photograph?
We'll put the links up on the Gumtree Guardian site, and Erin, could we put it up on the ALA's Biosecurity Hub as well? Is that possible?
Yeah, we can do that.
So we'll make those available, I think in most places now, so in Queensland and New South Wales, I don't think that you're required to report it if you find it, but I probably shouldn't talk too much about it because I'm not 100% certain about that yet. So yeah, I know Western Australia in particular, they're very keen to hear from you if you see it. So it's definitely a good idea to check out what the requirements are there.
So Erin, the 1st of March is the launch date, which is Friday. Tell people a little bit about what's going to happen, and how best, I mean, from all of you really, how best you think people can help be the amplifiers, because we need to get this information out there, and the campaign for the month is an awesome way to beat the drum, so to speak. But how are we going to keep the band marching?
Good question.
On March.
Yeah, so our campaign runs for the full month, and hopefully Rebecca's found lots of different partners and collaborators, and we'll all be sharing the same message throughout the month. And Costa, we really appreciate your time as well in helping us spread the word. But importantly, it doesn't stop in March. So one of the things that's really uncertain is seasonality with Myrtle Rust. A lot of indication that humidity helps with the spread and presence of Myrtle Rust, but still lots of uncertainty about what kind of conditions. And so we're interested throughout the year, any kind of observations and sightings. As I said, we really just want to raise awareness of the importance of reporting, the importance of open data, getting as much information as we can. Alyssa mentioned our New Zealand neighbors, and they've had this formidable Myrtle Rust campaign that was really successful. So we want to absolutely replicate that, and perhaps a little bit of rivalry or competition between the two of us. But yeah, we want to keep the observations going for as long as possible, because really the more sightings, the more data, the better our researchers and government and industry and communities can be.
There's an interesting comment here from Donna Hay. Seen it at a nursery stock on the sunny coast. The staff had no idea and didn't really care. And I suppose, when you don't know about it, it's like, oh well, whatever. So I kind of feel like, if we are all getting behind this and we build this momentum with the project and Rebecca with the Guardian project, like, then it can just develop as a campaign that, I can share, it can be shared through the nursery industry, and that information needs to get out there. So I think really for everyone listening, if you think of networks that you can get this information out into, don't hesitate, because it's out there. Yet, as I think HB said, this needs a national coordination. It needs to be a project that builds, and what we're hearing here firsthand is that this is a project in its infancy, but we need to supercharge it. Do you want to add to that, any of you?
I think this might have got a bit garbled when I first started talking, but I really would like to, first of all, just go back to a point that you made right at the start of this broadcast, which is that aggregating this data is going to be so important as well, just to really bring this data to life and to really get a really comprehensive picture of just where it's spreading and which plants it's actually affecting and how different plants are being affected. And you mentioned that this is a project in its infancy, but there has been, as Alyssa mentioned before, there's a really a small but really dedicated network of researchers and plant pathologists that have been working on this for a long time. And they've been doing fantastic work, but they haven't had those eyes and ears on the ground really to support their work. And so anything that anybody can do to make their lives a little bit easier and give them some more tools in their sort of toolbox to be able to try to find ways to maybe treat this disease or prevent it from spreading any further, or even just to preserve those species that are badly affected by it. That is fantastic. And so, yeah, spreading the information about this through the networks is amazing. If you do see it on plants in nurseries, or like somebody said at Bunnings, there is information again on the various state websites about what plant nurseries are required to do. So you can always be that person who brings up the web page for the biosecurity page and say that you're in, and shows them, this is what we're looking at. This is what you're required to do if you see it in a nursery near you.
I might just jump in quickly as well to say that I don't want anyone to get the idea that all of this information will just go into a black hole. So we know that there's different strains of Myrtle Rust in different parts of the world. So we have the pandemic strain here in Australia. But something that we're really interested in understanding is if the pathogen, if Myrtle Rust is changing its behaviour within Australia. And so some of the data that has been uploaded onto iNaturalist already is being used for scientists to go and take collections, and they're now testing it to see if we do happen to have different strains in Australia, because that would have implications for how we manage it going forward. So, you know, as much as it's interesting for us to know if it's spreading anywhere else, it's already having some really major impacts in how we're dealing with it in Australia and how we're understanding the pathogen. So all of this data, whatever we collect, is hugely helpful to us in understanding it.
That's really wonderful to hear, because, you know, for me, from a community point of view, I just love anything that can give people an opportunity to contribute, rather than just hear, oh God, I thought it was Phytophthora and now it's Myrtle Rust, and what's next? You know, we've got pandemics in health and we've got pandemics in nature, like all of these things, you know, can be overwhelming and almost, you know, debilitating to think, oh, well, what can little old me do? And I really appreciate the questions here. Like, you know, Stephen McKnight, I'll put this one to you, all of you. Can the infected plant be saved by cutting away the infected areas, or is it a terminal thing?
So from what we know about how plants are responding, Erin mentioned it before, that there's a lot of seasonality to it. So depending on the climatic conditions will depend on whether or not there's a lot of the rust around and how it will impact particular species. But what we understand is that if a species can get infected from it at any point in its life, it will continue to be able to get infected by it. The best advice we have is that if you're willing to part with the plant in your garden, it's best to replace it with something that is less likely to get infected, because it will be something ongoing. And it just depends if you're willing to manage it. So there are ways that you can manage it, but it will take a lot of upkeep. And we really want to see less of the rust in sort of circulating in the environment. So the advice is really to remove the plant if you're willing to part with it.
So that pretty much answers Carol Marshall's follow-up question, which is, what is the treatment or prevention approach? Pretty much. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think prevention is always best. Sorry, I think I've jumped in front of someone there, but prevention.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, in terms of both treatment and prevention, one of the reasons that we want to collect all of this data is also because there are people who are working on breeding more resistant strains or of plant varieties of plants, and also trying to develop things like vaccines or fungicides that can be most effective on for treating Myrtle Rust. The difficulty there, of course, is that these things generally won't work at a very large scale. And when we're talking about whole ecosystems, vaccination or some kind of a spray is unlikely to be particularly useful. And that's why it's so important that we do what we can to, like Alyssa says, prevent the amount of Myrtle Rust that's in circulation from growing too large, and especially in areas that are close to natural wilderness areas. It's so important to keep that those numbers down. And I just thought I'll share the website that's got sort of the overall information about what to do in different states. And Costa, maybe you can share that in the chat as well. And I think just as an additional thing, something that we haven't really talked probably enough about so far in this broadcast, is just to be very aware when you're walking out in the bush, driving interstate, for example, or working in your garden, to actually make sure that you use best hygiene practices to clean your tools, to clean your camping gear, to clean out your car before you travel into different environments, because we really don't want this to spread accidentally through people who obviously love the outdoors and love nature and love gardens. We don't want that to be one of the vectors for spreading this disease.
Yeah, that's right. We were talking about that with the botanic gardens and you know, people like mountain bikers and bushwalkers. You know, these are all, you know, vectors that can spread it, you know, on your shoes, and cleaning your shoes, and you know, even if you're a camper, cleaning your tent, and particularly the ground sheet, because that can carry those spores, and you basically just roll it up and then roll the tent out at the next location and become that vector that we don't want. So yeah, thanks for those tips. I'm just looking at the questions. Hygiene stations. There should be more hygiene stations set up. Yeah, well, I suppose one of the things that I remember we were shown is just having a little spray bottle and spraying your boots when you put them on, and then when you return to the car, spraying your boots with a little bit of I think it was just a little bit of metho was enough to be that hygiene element. And the same again, of course, for you gardeners out there, doing that regular, that little bit of a brush down, wipe down in between pruning, so that you aren't, and I mean, that's good hygiene at the best of times, not just regarding Myrtle Rust, but regarding any other infections. Now we've just clocked up the hour, so I'm just conscious of all of your time, and real appreciative of everyone who's stayed in. Donna Hay, remind to bag it before cutting off a section before you take exam. Okay, thanks Donna. I was wondering whether the honey industry could be spreading it with their bees. Yeah, that's probably a story for another time. Is there anything that could we go round the ground for a final thought, everyone, on just as a closing thought? Who would like to start? Maybe we'll start down the bottom. Start in the bottom right and move clockwise. What do you reckon, Rebecca?
Yes, that's probably me. Yeah, I just think this is the kind of collaboration between science and members of the public that really helps to not only build greater trust between science and members of the public, but also helps them understand a little bit more what the scientists are doing, and help scientists understand what the true real value of having people on the ground looking out for these kinds of things. And Myrtle Rust is the perfect, or invasive species in general is a really fantastic way to get involved in actually helping out the environment, looking after Australia's biodiversity, and contributing to scientific work that's happening to learn as much as we can about the threats to that biodiversity. So it's fantastic if people are able to participate, and even if you don't participate by collecting data, participate by making sure that you're not spreading this particular disease, by being very hygiene aware when you're traveling or gardening.
Yeah, wonderful. I don't think I have much more to add other than just thanking everyone for logging in tonight. It's really fantastic to see so many people interested and asking really wonderful questions about what they can do. Like, that's all we're asking for, is really to get the community involved. And it's really obvious that there's a lot of people out there that care as much as all of us in the room do as well. So yeah, thank you to everyone.
Yeah, I'll just second that. I'm really grateful for everyone's attention and wonderful comments. And Costa, thank you so much for facilitating this discussion. And as we said, the Atlas of Living Australia, which is where all the open biodiversity data is in Australia, that's where you can find more information from March the 1st. And we're working with all of our partners and all of our amazing collaborators to help spread the word.
If I could put on my general citizen science hat for a moment, I think one of the really fantastic things about projects like Gumtree Guardians and Myrtle Rust is that this is often a really good entry point for people to get into all kinds of other citizen science projects as well. So often people might not be aware of how they can contribute, or might not be sure if they can offer anything of value. And then you have a project like the Myrtle Rust project come along, and you realize that your observations and your data are really useful and valuable. And then it just opens up this whole new world for you, because you realize that there are hundreds or even thousands of different citizen science projects out there covering all kinds of amazing creatures and areas across Australia. And suddenly you can realize you can be contributing to all of those as well. So it often taking that first step and contributing to that first project is really that first step towards a really enriching journey. That, as something I alluded to before, is you're not only learning a lot yourself and really building up your knowledge, but you're also contributing to real world science and research and having a meaningful impact, regardless of whether you have any scientific background or knowledge whatsoever. That's really the power of citizen science, is that everyone can contribute and everyone can really make a big difference.
Wow, thank you, Thomas. Thank you, Thomas, for wrapping it up with your. Well, you don't have a metho bottle. You've got an enthusiasm bottle of spray there, like you all have. With Rebecca, Erin, and Thomas, thanks for bringing life and energy to a project that, you know, could easily be seen as yet another thing that's just as who was it here that said time to look after the mother? You know. Babbittly, Snippy. Yeah, time to look after the mother. There's so many elements of the mother that needs our help at the moment, and like we just can't throw our hands in the air. And that's the beauty of Erin, as you've talked, and Thomas, and as you've all said, like this role that we can play in getting these databases in front of scientists and people that know, and give them that information to then continue to do their work. So we'll certainly pass this word around to everyone who's been on here today and sharing their comments. Patrick, Jeanette, Giovanni, always here. Love it, Giovanni. Karen, great to see you. Stephen McKnight, adding that metho spray bottle to your hiking kit. You know, that's a wonderful thing, because now Stephen is an amplifier, and people will see him using that and say, what are you doing? And you know, every time you pull it out, someone's going to see it, and that's what it's about. Hello, Robbie, Austin, thanks for joining in. To everyone that's been part of it, make sure that you follow, and I'll get Thomas and Alyssa and Rebecca and Erin, for that matter, to just put all the links in the bottom of the comments, so that you can jump on there, cut and paste them, and follow what they're doing. Follow through, but most of all, share this information so that the people in your networks get to see it and start asking you questions. It doesn't take much to push a share, but most of all, put a comment on there rather than just straight share. Put a comment and personalize it, from whether it was this discussion, whether it was what Thomas or Alyssa or Rebecca said, but make sure you mention their names and mention what they're doing, so that it's got a face, you know, that it's not just this another big thing that's like, oh, you know, dilemma, chaos, and, you know, another crisis. You know, everything's crisisized these days. If it's not fire, it's drought. If it's not drought, it's flood. If it's not flood, it's cost of living. If it's not, Myrtle Rust, it's phytophthora. It's a crisis. Like we've got to remember to bring it back to individuals like these 4 people on the ground who have their networks that can give you more information to share. So big thanks everyone for being with us. And on Friday, I'll be having another chat, this time on Instagram on Friday morning about 7:30, 8 o'clock. So I'll put some posts up there and we'll get it out into the Insta circles, and then I'll put it out on TikTok as well, and out on radio and in blogs, so that we can make Myrtle Rust March something that, we hashtag and get the conversations going. And if someone doesn't know, you don't say no. When you don't know, you find out. So help people find out. Thanks again, Alyssa, Thomas, Rebecca, and Erin, and everyone. And we'll see you again for another update.
Thank you so much.
See you.